Well, a week ago, I stood here talking about a peace deal in Ukraine. Now attention has switched from Kiev to Crimea, as we heard there in the news, armed men blockading 2 airports in the region. The new government's accused Russia of an armed invasion, something they deny. Meanwhile, the former President Yanukovych has appeared in public in Russia for the first time since fleeing Ukraine. In a press conference, he said fascist hooligans have taken power. Well, it's led to concerns over further divisions inside Ukraine. Over the next hour, we're going to speak to people inside Crimea to get their perspective. And you can live tweet us throughout the programme. As ever, you can use the hashtag WHYS, and all of the ways to get in touch will be on the screen throughout the programme.
I experienced.
This is chaos.
People are going to want to know.
Let's just say something.
Good to have your company here with us on World Have Your Say. If you've got any comments, they'll come straight to me on my tablet. We'll try and weave them into our conversation. Now, before I introduce you to the guests who are here with us to talk to us for the next hour about this topic, let's have a listen to what the former president of Ukraine had to say over the last couple of hours. He's held a press conference in Russia. It's the first time that he's been seen in public since he fled Kiev at the weekend. Let's pull up this first clip from his press conference.
I can tell you, I am ashamed. Actually, what's more, I would like to apologize. First of all, I would like to apologize to veterans, to the people of Ukraine, for what happened in Ukraine, for the fact that I did not have enough strength to keep stability, and I allowed this lawlessness to happen.
And that was Viktor Yanukovych. He was talking from a press conference in Russia. He was actually asked by a journalist, do you have anything that you want to apologise for, that you feel sorry for? And that was his response. Let me introduce you to a couple of guests who are going to begin our conversation. Artem Liss is BBC Europe Hub editor. He joins us from our London studios. And Andranik Migranyan is director of the Institute for Democracy and Cooperation and joins us from New York. Andranik, first of all, I'm assuming you've seen much of what President Yanukovych had to say a couple of hours ago, the former president of Ukraine. What's your reaction to what he said?
Yeah, I think it's not unexpected what he said. He always considered that these people who took power in Kiev, they acted under the pressure of armed, militant, nationalist people from the West. And he, several days ago, already claimed that they are illegitimate. They turned down the results of the negotiated agreement, which they achieved, witnessed by French, Polish and German foreign ministers. And he is considering himself as a president legitimately elected in competitive elections, and he doesn't recognize the power in Kiev, and he considers that this was a coup.
You say it's a coup, you claimed it was armed militant groups. Other people would say it was a popular uprising with people saying this is not what we want from our president and we want change.
Yeah, that's true. You know, everybody wants change, but change are happening in different way. In this case, if that was a popular uprising, why a French foreign minister, German foreign minister, Polish foreign minister participated in this agreement signing? And according to agreement, by the end of the year, according to Ukrainian laws, elections were supposed to be organized early presidential and parliamentary elections, which means he didn't order his security forces or his supporters to smash the demonstrations, to clean the Maidan, to kick them out. He never ever wanted to use the force and to have a big bloodshed. But that's why even Berkut, this riot police, was not armed. What was very funny, because protesters in streets from western part of Ukraine, they were armed because they were looting the armament, they were stealing the armament from police stations, ammunition, and using them. But the riot police was unarmed practically.
Well, Andronique, we're very much looking back there, and I want us to start looking forward to what's happening in Crimea today, and also to bring in Artem Liss, BBC Europe Hub editor, for a reaction to what Viktor Yanukovych had to say from Russia. What are your initial thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think Mr. Yanukovych said anything that would be surprising in any shape or form, really. What he said, as Mr. Migranyan has just told us, is that he does believe he is still legitimate as president, and that he is hoping that Russia, as the way he put it, Russia is Ukraine's strategic partner, so he is hoping that Ukraine will support him. Now, the way this is being taken in Ukraine is very, very different from the way it's being taken in Russia. What Mr. Migranyan said just now is more or less corresponds to Russia's standard position on this issue. But reaction in Ukraine has been massively different. And I think the gist of it is in some of the tweets which we have been seeing on BBC Russian and BBC Ukrainian, people saying, this is so passé, he's talking as if he lives in a time warp, and that the political reality has really moved on.
And do you think, I mean, I'm interested to know, there's lots of commentary, isn't there, around why President Putin has decided to take Viktor Yanukovych effectively under his wing, and whether this could actually cause greater problems for Russia down the line. What's your thoughts on that, Artem?
Well, I think what Mr. Putin did when he accepted Mr. Yanukovych in Russia, and let's not kid ourselves here, this sort of decision is, you know, it cannot be taken by anybody other than people at the very, very top of the Russian political elite. So when Russia accepted Mr. Yanukovych, I think it was not so much a sign of support for Mr. Yanukovych as it was a signal being sent to people out there in Ukraine, a sign saying, you know, Russia is happy to side with those who you think are your enemies. So it's not a sign of support for Yanukovych, it's a signal being sent to the Maidan and to people in Kiev, I think.
Do stay with us. I want to introduce a new guest who's joining us now on Skype. Olga Stolbova is the director of International House in Sevastopol and is in Crimea, obviously in Sevastopol. Olga, what's your reaction to what Viktor Yanukovych said in his press conference in the last couple of hours?
Could you fill me in on that? Because we had a work day here, and I've been at work from 8 o'clock in the morning, and we obviously didn't have any news here going on.
Olga,
we have classes going on. I
totally understand that. Of course, you're getting on with your day-to-day business. Maybe, Artem, you can fill in Olga and the highlights of what Mr. Yanukovych said.
Well, I think the highlights, Olga, there were that Mr. Yanukovych said that people who came to power in Kiev were, in his view, and I'm quoting him now, fascist and nationalist thugs. He also said that he still considered himself Ukraine's legitimate president. He said he would return to Ukraine as soon as it's safe for him to do so. And then he also spoke about the sort of support he is expecting from Russia, although he was very, very clear, he said it very clearly, that he did not expect and did not want, indeed, a Russian intervention, a Russian military intervention in Ukraine.
I don't think he's a legitimate president of the Ukraine, because he actually, well, theoretically he is legitimate, but what he did to the country, nobody wants him here. What else?
Well, let's pull up another video from that press conference for people who didn't see all of it. Mr. Yanukovych said he supported Crimea's residents who are worried about nationalists in Kiev, but said he would not ask for military assistance.
It's perfectly obvious why ordinary people, Crimeans, want to self-organize, why they set up self-defense brigades in Crimea. Of course, they want to protect their houses, protect their families. This is perfectly natural. I think Crimeans hear me now, and I would like to address Crimeans as well. Please, don't allow bloodshed to happen. Don't allow fratricide. As the President of Ukraine, I have to say that Crimea should remain part of Ukraine.
So the words there of Viktor Yanukovych. Olga, he was saying at the end there that Crimea should stay as part of Ukraine. Is that something you agree with and something that you think will happen?
I do think so. I think definitely Crimea is part of Ukraine, and it should be part of Ukraine. And nobody here wants to have to be at war. And the reason why I agreed to take part in this conference was that I received many phone calls from my friends all over the world, and they asked, like, are you okay? Is everything all right? And I can assure you that there are no tanks in Sevastopol streets. There are no military troops here. No, people carry on with their day-to-day lives, but they do want their government to protect them from whatever may happen. Because here in the Crimea we have three ethnic groups. We have Russians, we have Ukrainians, and we have the Tatars. And I don't think it's a good idea to put any idea in people's mind that it's possible to start a war here.
Andronik, do you want to speak to Olga?
Olga is a very sober person, and I think that she is expressing her own views. But I know that overwhelming majority of Crimeans, because I am familiar with all these events since late 80s, since Perestroika period, never ever Russians in Crimea considered that drunken guy who led Communist Party of Soviet Union in '54 gave, according to any laws, this peninsula to Ukraine, and that was, of course, that created a serious tension after collapse of Soviet Union, because before the collapse nobody paid any attention, because everybody knew that this is just formal, being inside Ukrainian Federation, because everything was decided in Moscow. That's why Crimean population several times expressed very clearly their view that they want either to be independent or to rejoin with Russia, or at least to have much more autonomy. And at this moment, it's very good that Crimean leaders, they are not talking about secession, about independence, but they really would like to have a real autonomy, because never ever they had the power to elect mayor of Sevastopol, to elect their executive powers in Simferopol. And of course they are scared, but this crazy, as Yanukovych said, thugs and crazy nationalists under swastika, who already repealed the law on language, about the languages, they will come to Crimea, ban Russian language, make repressions against Russian population, Russian-leaning political forces. This is really a danger. That's why they are arming themselves, and they are ready to, protect themselves against these crazy national fascists.
Well, Andronik, you're making so many points there, and as you're talking, I can see Olga nodding and at times shaking her head. And I'm keen for us to have a conversation. Olga, how do you respond to Andronik?
I totally agree. Everything what was said was, yes, that's how a lot of people think, and that's how a lot of people what they feel like, because they do want. Yes, there is a situation where now a lot of people want to be autonomous, the Crimea to be autonomous, still part of the Ukraine, but please let us make our own decisions. Yes, I agree. And that was probably the reason why people in Sevastopol were trying somehow to vote for the mayor of Sevastopol, or to elect him somehow.
Andronik, Olga and Artem, do stay with us here on World Have Your Say. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll carry on talking.
No, I absolutely
Talking about it.
let me say something. No, I
Talking about it.
let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. I'm Chloe Tilley. We're discussing the situation in Ukraine, the situation in Crimea. And for many people, it's not exactly clear where exactly Crimea is in these areas we're talking about. There is the map of Crimea. We've been talking about Simferopol and Sevastopol, two areas where the armed men have taken over the airports. The Ukrainian authorities are saying that it's actually Russian troops. Russia is denying any involvement in this at all. It's still a confusing picture, but just to give you an idea of how close they are. And of course, worth bearing in mind that the Russian Black Sea Fleet is based, of course, in Sevastopol, and that's why there is, of course, a presence there anyway. Now, let's bring up some of the tweets which have been coming in from our correspondents who are in the area. One is Christian Fraser. He has said another shot of Russian frigate patrolling the entrance to Balaclava port, the Coast Guard looking on. Daniel Sanford has sent a picture from Simferopol airport, patrolling much more openly now. Picture there of armed men. And then Anatoly Moreta is a protester quoted in Euronews. I think that Ukraine is in an expectant mood. We hope that if anything starts here like it did with the war in Ossetia, that Russia wouldn't stand by on the sidelines. Let me introduce you to guests who are with us. Peter Shalomovsky is a freelance photographer in Crimea. We're still joined by Olga Stolbova, who's the director of the International House in Sevastopol, and Irina is in Kharkov. Welcome all of you to World Have Your Say. Peter, first of all, we've been reporting on these scenes in Crimea today, and I know that you've witnessed some of them. Tell us what you've seen with your own eyes.
Hey there. First of all, we've been to the airport this morning. We've seen the armed men, exactly as you said it in the news. Then we came back to the city, and then we saw, like, Crimean officials addressing to the journalists with a statement. So, which one we want me to comment on?
And I think we're going to be pulling up some of your pictures in a moment to see the pictures that you've been taking. When you've been talking to people, what's been the general mood? When I spoke to you on World Service Radio last night, you were saying that people were confused about what was going on. What are people saying today?
Well, nothing changed. There's no more information coming. The thing is that everybody is pro-Russian here. Everybody. There's no disagreement on this. So everybody wants Russia to help. Everybody wants to be in Russia. I mean, to a certain extent or to the full extent, because this way they don't agree with each other. But I mean, no confusion. I mean, everybody's happy.
Would you agree with that, Olga? Everybody is happy with the situation? The reports we're getting on the outside don't seem to reflect the words that we're being told by people who are inside Crimea. So set the record straight for us.
How can you say that people are happy? Well, of course, people are worried about the situation. Of course, people are worried about what's going on. And it's the whole situation of what's going on in the country, not only here in Sevastopol, that worries people, because they don't know what will happen, like today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. Who will be the government and who will they elect, or if they elect, they are allowed to elect, or whatever happens. So, of course, people are worried, but in this particular situation, I think what is happening is that so much information everywhere in mass media about that everything is so bad, everything is horrible, that people started panicking. And this is, I just wanted to say that though people are worried, they don't know what will happen, but still the situation in Sevastopol here is safe. We don't have war at the moment.
Let me bring in Artem Liss again, BBC Europe Hub editor. Just explain for people watching around the world the significance of Crimea and why it's in the situation it is as an autonomous region.
Well, I think one way of looking at the Crimea is an equivalent to the Ukrainian Riviera, really. It's a massively beautiful, massively warm and pleasant place where a lot of people have traditionally been going on holiday. Now, Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula, which is sort of stuck on at the southern tip of Ukraine, belonged to Russia in the Soviet times. Then, as one of the guests here said, was handed over to Ukraine in the year 1954. And the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which is a massive navy force with at least 14,000 people serving there, is at the moment stationed in the city of Sevastopol. Russia is renting the facilities needed for the fleet from the Ukrainians. Sevastopol, of course, is a city which is very rich in history and in military history above all. A lot of the Russians, when they hear the word Sevastopol, their sort of immediate, almost subconscious answer is to say Sevastopol is the city of Russian glory. So for the Russians, it has very deep symbolic importance around Sevastopol. It also has an importance because there are a lot of Russian nationals, a lot of Russian citizens living in the Crimea, at one count up to 60,000 people. For Mr. Putin and for people who agree with him and who agree with his view of the world, really, the Crimea has become part of Ukraine almost by accident. And a lot of people in Moscow think that Moscow should be playing a much bigger role in what's happening in the Crimea.
Well, let's bring in Irina, who's in Kharkov in Ukraine, the eastern part of the country, not inside Crimea. And I'm interested, Irina, how you view Crimea yourself. Is it important and a significant part of the country to you?
Yes, and it's a significant part, and I'm very concerned about the situation in Crimea because in the whole Ukraine, people don't have tendency to violence. They are very peaceful and they are very enduring. And now people become aggressive because they don't know about their future, they don't know what to do. And for example, here in Kharkov, we don't have problems with language. We speak Russian normally, and no one diminishes the rights of people who speak Russian languages. Yes, and I'm very concerned that the situation in Crimea will go under control because we know what happened in Kiev, and we don't want more deaths. We don't want the conflict between the Crimea Tatars, people who speak Ukrainian, and people who speak Russian. We are the nation. We don't want death and blood anymore.
One of the issues that emerged when we spoke about this on World Service Radio yesterday was many people in Crimea saying that they felt they just weren't being informed by the new interim government in Kiev. They felt there were a lot of gaps in the narrative and they were frightened of the future. Olga, is that something that you identify with?
Yes. What's going on in Kiev, it really affects our life here because well, not only politically, but also economically. And all those people who were elected or who were appointed by the, at the moment by the executive authorities in Kiev, not necessarily those people who who were elected by everybody in Ukraine. So they don't represent the interests of the whole Ukraine. They represent the interests of just some groups of people. And that's why people are worried here. They want, we want the government that represents everybody's interests, and it should be elected legally.
And briefly, Peter, is that the sort of thing that you're hearing from people that you speak to there?
Yes, of course. They're worried about the fact that people here in Crimea have been appointed by the, previous Ukrainian government. That's true. That's true. They don't want this. That's why they are going for a more wide autonomy. This is what was said today during the address to the press.
Well, Peter, as we speak, some pictures behind us from Simferopol Airport shot by this BBC a little bit earlier on. Do stay with us here on World Have Your Say. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll carry on talking with our guests in Crimea. Hello, I'm Chloe Tilley. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're live speaking to people in Crimea as the crisis in Ukraine intensifies. The former President Yanukovych has said in a press conference in Russia that what's happening in Crimea is a natural reaction to the gangster coup in Kiev. Well, that interim government in Kiev has accused Russia of carrying out an armed invasion of airports in Crimea, and tensions are heightening. It's fueling concerns of divisions, and that's where we're picking up our conversation.
Talking about it. Top priority.
I experienced.
This is chaos. People are going to want to know.
Let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Well, as we talk, many of you getting in touch with us from across the world. We're having calls coming in from India, Mauritius, Pakistan, Cyprus, Netherlands, Italy, Canada, the US and South Africa. We're on Twitter. You can use the hashtag WHYS to get involved with our conversation with us. We are joined by Yanukovych Migranyan, who is director of the Institute for Democracy and Cooperation, joining us from our New York studio. Svetlana Kobzar is a policy analyst at RAND Europe, and Irina is in Kharkov in Ukraine. I want to get all of your reaction, first of all, to this comment, which I want to pull up. Ukraine's interim Interior Minister, Arsen Avakov, has posted this on his Facebook page. He says it's a military intervention and occupation in violation of all international agreements. This is a direct provocation of bloodshed on territory of a sovereign state. Svetlana, first of all, do you agree with that interpretation?
I think we need to see now what exactly is happening, and I would refrain from yet commenting exactly on whether it's military intervention or not. One can say for sure that there are some movements by the Russian Federation in terms of military maneuvering on the borders of Ukraine, which puts pressure, psychological pressure for Ukrainian government. And it's important to note that at this fragile time for Ukraine, when it tries to get its act together, tries to address economic and social challenges, this is not a very friendly behavior, to say the least. And the fact that in 1994, Ukraine and Russia and the US signed the Budapest Memorandum that guarantees its territorial integrity, it should serve as a reminder that that territorial integrity should be respected at all costs.
Yanukovych, speak to Svetlana. She says it's not friendly behaviour.
Oh, listen, this interim Ministry of Interior is absolute idiot, because what he is talking, he has no idea what about he is talking, because the guys who never respected any law, acted against the law, violated every kind of agreements, every law, took power against the law. They are talking about the law. It's a joke. It's ridiculous. By the way, I would like to address to the lady from Kharkov. She said that they speak Russian, they enjoy, they are quiet, in peace. First law which passed this Rada was just to repeal the law about regional languages, which means very soon nobody can speak Russian, and Russians will be banned to speak as regional official languages. Though, you know, when Ukraine got independence, 90% of people spoke Russian, more than half considered Russian as a first language, but the language is squeezing and squeezing. And by the way, coming back to Crimea, never ever.
Well, hang on, before you make that point, sir. No, I'll let you come back to make that point, but I think it's fair to let Irina respond to that. And of course, I'll come back to you to make that point later on. But I'm keen for us all to have a conversation. Irina, how would you respond?
I would say that language is just a tool to communicate for people. It's not the main thing in our lives. And now it's no matter what language we speak, Ukrainian or Russian, we need to unify our forces to build a democratic society. We have the same goals. We want high levels of education, and we need quality medical care. We want high salaries and pensions and so on. So we have the same goals, and there must be no difference between people who speak Russian and Ukrainian.
Your attacks from the Bandera from Western Ukraine, who are declaring that they will come and destroy every trace of Russianness in Ukraine, outlaw the language and kick out all non-Ukrainians. They hate Russians, hate Poles, hate Jews, hate everybody. And these thugs are practically controlling the situation in Kiev until now.
Svetlana, you were trying to respond.
Yes, I tried to respond. I think there's been a lot of propaganda regarding what happened in Euromaidan. I completely agree with the notion that now is the time to unite and the language, whether it's Russian or Ukrainian, I think most Ukrainians speak both, and that's the way it has been and will continue. I think the point also linking different factual errors, for example, blaming Euromaidan on Bandera is really misleading because, for example, if we look at the sociological data, even the Euromaidan activists, only over 50% came from the Western Ukraine, but 44% or so came from southern and eastern Ukraine. So it's not just a nationalist-led movement. It comprised of many people and groups, and they all were united with this wish, as already was pointed out, by the better future for the country, by the anti-corrupt government, by reforms that are long overdue, and it has taken 20 years to arrive to that point, and it's disrespectful to really mislead many people by arguing that, by kind of propagating this myth. And the second point linked to that, I think that a lot of divisions in Ukraine comes to the fact that some may believe in this propaganda or watched certain channels which propagate this untrue information. And I think when you ask an average Ukrainian on the street what would they like for their country, exactly what has been already repeated here, it's just having a good future, good education, government that serves the people. And we've seen that Yanukovych and his regime haven't served the people. They've been grossly corrupt, and I think that movement was not necessarily led by extremists, but it was movement for Ukrainian dignity and for ability to choose their own leaders and to hold them to account. And so, and arguing otherwise is really disrespectful, I think, and fallacious.
Listen, I would like to make just a very small remark. Look at the facts, not about propaganda. Repealing the law about regional languages, outlawing regional languages. This is propaganda or this is real fact? Don't do propaganda yourself. You are just ignoring evident facts.
Well, but cite a study about who was there at the Euromaidan. I can cite specific sociological studies of studying of who were there.
I am talking about
let's have a polite conversation to one another. Svetlana, you finish your point, and then Angelique, by all means, do come in.
Yes, and regarding the language, it is not actually agreed by all of the Ukrainians, and I think it's part of the democratic society to debate now whether this language will be changed or not. And I think if we have a government that is accountable, that people can voice their views in a democratic way, and a government that is not corrupt, then this law can also be changed. But first, it's important to respect the system and to respect the people who voice their rights to do that, not just to blame everyone on extremists and fascists. This is disrespectful to people, to the audience, and disrespectful to the people who participated in the protest.
This is a pure demagoguery. And by the way, coming back to Crimea, I must tell you that never ever population in Crimea felt themselves secure and protected as now, because nobody is mediating. They are deciding their own fate, and they are really happy.
Well, I think going back to the Crimea, actually, it is an important issue, if I may add, because it's not just an issue about the Crimea, it's an issue about international security. Because if we go back to Ukrainian independence, and when it decided to become a non-nuclear state, it was a very bold decision driven by security guarantees from the US and Russia. By the nature of the international community. And I think it was a decision that served as an important lesson for other states, that you can release nuclear weapons and be secure. And I think now it's very, very important to uphold that memorandum, because it sends an important messages to countries such as Iran and other members of the international community. And that's why it's really essential for the US, for the EU to watch the situation very closely, to ensure that indeed there is a consolidation of the nation and state, and that people in Crimea can feel peaceful and secure and part of this autonomous republic and have their voice heard. But I think considering changes in Kiev and demands for accountability, it's a very legitimate demand to ask for all the voices to be heard. And I think we are making steps in that direction. But if there's going to be military maneuvers or threats from outside forces this process of making democratic a country where all voices are heard is made much more difficult.
Well, Svetlana and Andronik, I want to introduce you to Jan, who joins us from Berlin. He's Russian but living in Germany. And Jan, I spoke to you on the radio earlier this week, so it's great to have your company on our television programme of World Have Your Say. Listening to this conversation, what's the point that you'd like to make?
Well, I agree with much of what Svetlana has been saying, but I think the important thing is to also keep in mind that the whole Crimean issue is sort of being escalated by Russia, mostly for its internal consumption within Russia, because by framing the Crimean conflict as a conflict between Ukrainians and Russians, it really forces the Russian public to take sides and ignore the larger issue at hand, what the Euromaidan protests were actually about in Kiev, which was about democracy and accountability and fighting against corruption and so on. And so really for the Russian government, as it is right now, having a democratic Ukraine is almost its worst nightmare. So it's kind of a distraction strategy to focus on Crimea and to really escalate the situation there. And I think we shouldn't be talking on behalf of Crimeans. And I think if we were to actually talk to the people that live there and leave their everyday lives, not the paramilitary groups that suddenly showed up, then they will tell you that they want to live. They also want to live in a democratic society where all voices are heard. And I think especially young Crimeans, a lot of them that moved to Kiev to live there and so on, they want to live in a multinational, multilingual society. And so I think I don't think Russians can speak on the behalf of Crimeans in that sense.
Well, Jan, as you speak, I can see Svetlana nodding away, but I want to pull up this comment and get your response to it. AFP reporter Stuart Williams had this to say about Viktor Yanukovych's appearance in Russia. Whether Yanukovych's presence in Russia can be politically useful to Russia remains to be seen, and he may prove a burden who needlessly adds another issue to relations with the West. That's from Stuart Williams, a reporter with AFP. Andronik, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. Why do you think President Putin is supporting Viktor Yanukovych? Do you think it could become a political burden to him?
Oh, he is not a political burden. Yanukovych was a failed politician, but still he is the only legitimate institution in Ukrainian life, because he is elected president in competitive elections recognized by East and West. And in this capacity, he is, of course, somebody who could be used against this radical nationalists in Kiev and their actions over there. And another problem is very important, that nobody must distort the situation and history. The problem is that never ever Russia have every opportunity to destabilize Ukraine, to dismember Ukraine. Never ever did that, as though in 1992-93 Supreme Soviet of Russia decided that Crimea must be rejoined with Russia. President Yeltsin, and I was his advisor at that time, just ignored that and then bombarded Supreme Soviet. In '94, Russian party won the elections in Crimea and passed the resolution about rejoining with Russia. President Yeltsin ignored that. Never ever Russia used any opportunity to, to use this card for, as this very, I don't know who was the guy who was talking from Germany, might be no idea that this is a card using for Russian internal interests or something like that.
Well, Andronik, that was Jan who was speaking to us from Berlin, and he remains with us as we have this discussion. I can see so many of you getting in touch with us from across the world, from Ukraine, Somalia, France, Zimbabwe, the Philippines, UK. Thank you so much for getting in touch with us. Keep all of your comments coming to us here at World Have Your Say, and we'll carry on talking in the next few minutes.
No, I absolutely talking about it. Let me say something. No, I absolutely talking about it. Let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Before I introduce you to some new guests who are joining us for the last few minutes of the programme, I want to pull up this video to give you more of a context on the situation in Crimea and how indeed it was handed from Russian control to Ukraine. Nina Khrushcheva is the great-granddaughter of Nikita Khrushchev, who of course is the Soviet Union leader who transferred Crimea from Russia to Ukrainian power back in 1954.
Nikita Khrushchev, my great-grandfather, was a big fan of Ukraine, and so I think in some ways it was also a way to reward Ukraine for his for the fact that it was the largest republic after the Russian Federation within the Soviet Union. At the time when the move was made to have Crimea transferred from Russia to Ukraine, it was an entirely different geopolitics. The world was different. Crimea, in his view, would always be part of the Soviet Union. And as far as the Soviet Union was understood at the time, or arranged at the time, it almost didn't matter that much where Crimea was, part of Ukrainian Republic or the Russian Republic, because it was all part of the same geography and part of the same Soviet geography.
That video there from Nina Khrushcheva. Well, let me introduce you to Victor. Those of you who watched World Have Your Say last week will be familiar with Victor Mishenko. He's in Donetsk in Ukraine and spoke to us last week when we reported news of that deal. It seems such a long time ago that we were speaking about that, Victor. I wonder what your reaction is to what's happening in Crimea in the last few hours.
Actually, it's part of all what's have been happening in Ukraine so far. And so we see more violence, less law and order in Ukraine, and it's the result of direct involvement of the European Union and the United States in the Ukrainian affairs. I think that the European Union and the United States can only instigate protests and mastermind violence, and it's high time for the Ukrainian people to make a decision which way to go and whether to really join European Union and to continue these protests, this violence, or to turn to Russia and for help and for the solution of this problem.
And Victor, do you think that Russia will get involved in Crimea? Obviously, we understand that, well, the Ukrainian authorities are accusing the Russian military of blockading at least one airport in Crimea. Russia, of course, denying that. Do you think Russia will take an active role inside Crimea? What will the next step be, in your view?
Actually, I do not know. I'm not in Crimea. I do not know the situation in Crimea. I think that Russia will exercise caution and will, but on the other hand, will do its best to protect the elected government of Crimea and in order to protect Russian interests as well.
Let's bring in Adil, who's a Crimean student in Istanbul. What do you make of what's happening in Crimea at the moment, Adil?
As I think this is, for me, it's military intervention to Crimea, and I think Russia tries to like this annexation of Crimea, because you know this is historically Russia always wanted Crimea to join Russia, and now it seems they have another chance, and I think they're gonna try their best to get Crimea again back to Russia.
That's interesting. Jan, would you agree with that? Adil saying that he thinks Russia will try and effectively take Crimea back.
No, I mean, I don't think that's a probable scenario. I think they're trying to bring Crimea sort of to a boiling point as much as they can, and really, I think it's part of not of a plan, but of a push to have. They really don't want to see the new Ukrainian government succeed, and I think Crimea
Jan,
happens
I'm going
to
to
be
jump
the
in at this point because we're right up against time. I suspect Jan may well be joining me on World Service Radio in a couple of hours' time. Do join us then. But for your company now, thank you so much. I'll speak to you again soon.
Let me say something.